Welcome to open sourcing a library. How hard can that be? And as you can see, sometimes opening up stuff is quite hard and difficult, but we'll see how that ends up. So first start, who am I? I'm typically asked, like, what do you do? Because we hear you do so many things. And whenever someone asks that, I'd say I develop things and I talk about them. And when I have time left, I still help people improve what they do in their daily work as a developer. What I actually do is not just being a full-stack developer, both for front-end and back-end, but I'm also a part-time developer advocate within my department with almost 300 engineers, helping them get better at what they do, mentoring them, supporting them, and giving them the opportunity to expand their knowledge while also learning from them, because I think that's how everything should work. You do both share and you learn from other people. And along with that, I'm also a co-organizer of a JOC in the North, and I'm also the organizer of an event within ING with backend speakers. So it's all meant to share with people and get them motivated and inspired to check out new things, like open sourcing. So the things that we're going to cover is my library, which is between quotes, because after you open source something, it's no longer really yours, because someone else can take it and build their own stuff on top of it. That's something to keep in mind. But that's not it. You also have to maintain it. You have to support it. You can't just say, here's my code, good luck with it, and I'm going to do something else. You could, but well, it's not really your product anymore, right? But once you're done with building a library, you want people to use it, so you should publish it. And we'll end with some of the takeaways. The open source itself, the benefits, is you can show off your skills. Because you can tell people, here's my code, this is what I achieved, this is how it looks, you can learn from it, and you can also get feedback from other people. Which is my second point here. Typically, if you work within a company, you have a couple of teams around you, maybe 2 teams, maybe 5 teams. That's a small bubble. If you open source, everyone can comment on your code, can review your code, and give feedback on your code. This will give you much broader feedback, which is quite interesting. And along with that, you can collaborate with other people outside that bubble, actually having them give pull requests and merge requests and helping you out with achieving new functionalities. Plus, you can inspire others. The main issue here is if I'm talking with a colleague and I want to show them something, if it's internal code, that's easy. If it's someone from outside the company, I can't share internal code and internal examples. But if I have open source code, I can just say, hey, look at my GitHub, it's here, you can look at it, and I can tell you how it's going to work and guide you along with that code. But one thing to keep in mind, and that's almost a year ago now, is that there's also some downsides. We had one quite important library in Linux, which was maintained by one person who was quite overworked, and they did try to bring malware in by influencing him. So that's something to keep in mind. Do try to find more people to support you in building code. The motivation for myself is that I like to try new things. I don't like the yearly, oh, you have to do this, we'll make a checklist, and when you're done, you will get a raise at the end of the year. That's not how I am. I'm still doing that for my job, of course, but along with that, I typically try to pick something for 2 or 3 months, something achievable, containable, and finish it up. Open sourcing was still on my list to do, like, hey, I want to do this sometime. And just open sourcing code is easy. You just put it in GitHub, it's done. But open sourcing a library, you actually want people to use the code, so that's much more complex, which is what this talk is about. And open source poses a challenge for you as well, because I've been using open source since I've basically been working in IT and studying in IT with Linux. You're feeling great because people in their own spare time, without being paid for it, are sharing code with you that you're actually using. And I sometimes feel a bit guilty about it. How can I give back to that? Well, you can support an open source project, but you can also open source your own code, doing the same thing. But one thing I have seen the past year is people, and that's some influencers on YouTube and Twitch as well, telling engineers, starting engineers, like, hey, open source code, build up your resume, build up your CV, and get a job like that. That's nice, but at that point you should also maintain it. If you open source something now, and you're going to look for a job a year from now, they will be looking at you like, hey, you didn't maintain this for a year. That's also a bad sign. So don't use it to pimp up your CV or your resume. Do it because you think it adds value, because you can show your skills off with it. And of course, your knowledge. Within ING, we also do some open sourcing, like the front-end components we have, which is used within the ING side. So if you know ING as a customer, you are using open source components then that you can use in your own projects as well. And we have an orchestration framework named Baker. But that's about it. Most of our open source, because we are quite open source focused, is inner source. So we can help out other teams, we can help out other departments, we can look at their code, learn from it, give feedback on it. And I think that's for most major, larger companies, that's an interesting approach. It's like open source, but then within the scope of your own company. Now, I'm not going to show you the new JUnit or the new Spring, because what I did is build a library for a game. Can I see some hands who recognizes the game? Because I will explain the next sheet. Great, at least I have some hands. I did this talk 3 weeks ago as well, and I saw one hand in this room of 100 people. It's like, oh man. For those that don't know it, it's a action RPG where you collect items. Typically, you just play it. You don't fully see it, but behind me, there's a list with data, and there's a list with how many items you collected. Typically, that's not in the game itself. So what I built is a reader for the save games that are updated, giving people real-time feedback. That's used for a player itself, but also for people who are streaming. Because typically, if they are speedrunning, they don't want to hear every 5 minutes like, hey, where are you? Are you doing well? Are you doing bad? For which we need this data. So the game itself is called Diablo 2 Resurrected. The game is now almost 25 years old, but it's been remade 3 years ago, so it does look a lot better than you might expect for a 25-year-old game. But underneath, it's still that old game designed over 25 years ago and built 25 years ago. But people still enjoy the way it's played because their underlying systems are complex enough, but accessible enough to actually use and calculate interesting values. The idea is to kill Diablo, drop items, do it again, get better items, and get better what you do over time, which is a bit like a gamble, but it stays interesting for people to still play. Even 25 years after the game was leaked, people are still playing this online. Diablo 4 has been released last year. People are still playing Diablo 2, 2 versions ago. However, I just wanted to put some simple statistics on. That was my original idea. And then I found out like, oh, those are nice puzzles. I can actually start calculating things. Because if you put items on people, they will get bonuses. And that's quite noticeable here. Those resistance, those add up. Those also add up above a certain value. So how are you going to calculate that? Because if I just calculate the plus everything, then I will be way above 95%. How should I compensate that? And it's not just the items that you're equipped, but also combinations of items in your inventory that sometimes give bonuses, sometimes don't. Calculating all of this was quite a nice challenge for me as a developer. Along with that, those old games were built in C, and those have a different layout compared to Java. So when I was picking stuff up that way, you can give your character name to an item. Of course, your character name is also in the save game file, has to be displayed, which works perfectly fine if you're below the maximum length, which is 15 characters, or longest possible if you type it out as a word. This is in C, and C has 0 terminated strings with a 0 character, unless you're at the maximum length. And I'm not reading bytes, I'm reading bits in bytes in a certain order. So if I don't find the 0 value, and I'm reading on, I'm getting a lot of garbage out. Those are interesting challenges to work around as a Java developer. So from a technological perspective, one of the issues I had is there's just so many variables. The wonderful thing I had is that the game over time has been made mod friendly. I did talk to one of the original developers, like, hey, did you do this from the start? Because it's really great for me as someone who's trying to read those files. We were 25 years from what you developed back then. And they added it over time. So originally, this was basically impossible unless you started debugging and reading bits, figuring out, is this the right value, and hoping it would work out. So because they do offer the modability, which many modern games do nowadays, it becomes a lot easier for me. Every time there's a patch, the update stuff, I pick up some text files, which are just CSV files, comma-separated files. Check those, new values, okay, I have to update my code. If not, then I'm fine, and I can go on. And as mentioned, Java reads in big endian and not in little endian. So whenever I mix those up, I will get a lot of different values, and the values will explode. I will read the wrong indexes as well, because some of them have a certain length. If you don't read the length correctly, then you will read some other bits that have completely different numbers. And that's incredibly difficult to debug. So I also had to write some helper functions to print out the bits in a byte in a certain boundary. Plus, I had to figure out what some of the values meant. Even though the game is quite old, people have been playing it for a long time, there's been a lot of modding. Not everything is documented. So one of the feedback I also got, can you also write something to write a savegame files? Because at the moment I'm only reading them. Reading is much easier than writing because you get a lot of values that don't make sense to you. And you also have to keep those and hope they don't change when you change something. So looking at the fixes I had to do, one of them was over time there were new patches. I had to read the bits, they were changing, figuring out, okay, what should I do? One point, I think they used a new C compiler. Their bit range moved 8 bits. So I was reading completely different values. And I figured, what the hell is going on here? I did manage to find out. I have some test cases around it. I even log if it happens again. So if they do change it back to another compiler, breaking my changes again, my fixes, I can now figure out how to solve that. Another thing that you can see here, this is happening in speedrunning. People are optimizing items with ultimate values that could drop, allowing them to be very fast in speedrunning. Sometimes they mess that up and they don't add name values, which is then 2047. So you can already guess that's not a full byte, it's a couple of bits. I would normally crash, which is quite annoying. I also did one of those speedruns myself and then had a big red error on my screen, so I stopped speedrunning and tried to fix it. But it's quite troublesome to figure these things out. These are just the technological challenges, but of course we have a lot more challenges if you build a library. Because if you build a library, it's just not which elements am I going to share with you. Am I going to share everything and do all the work for you, or am I going to just share a part and let you build stuff on top of it, which sounds perfect for a library. For me, a library is taking away complexity while offering you a minimum interface that's workable for what you need. So I also didn't want to share too much of the internals. Just let me do the complex thing. You can use my library, build cool software on top of it, and we'll see how that works out. Another thing I had to wonder about is which open source license should I use? Should I use the Apache license? Should I go for LGPL? Well, because the game has been out for so long, there were some LGPL2 lighter libraries already available in Java that I partially used, so I could read them and use them, and I figured, it's not really fair to the original developers to not release in the same version. So part of my library code is also LGPL v2 now. If you extend upon it, you can just use your Apache license. That's all available because it's a library license. And I need to figure out how was I going to publish it. Am I just going to give someone a jar file or a zip file and good luck with it? Or am I actually going to publish it to Maven Central or any other alternative? So we'll look at a couple of those as well. Plus, like I mentioned, I like challenges. I was wondering, can I actually anonymously publish code and see how that works? It turns out you can actually to Maven Central. Plus that you sometimes have people who are, well, a bit over-invested and might have some negative feedback at other locations as well. So you're like, maybe just use my nickname. Plus everyone playing the game and streaming the game, they know me by this nickname. So I did mention it's a secondary account. I do have my own personal account with my name on it as well. Plus I'm talking about it, so anyone can look me up anyway. And I figured out, let's just use my nickname, that's easier. Because if you say, oh, just use Johan's library, then people don't know who you're talking about. But if you use my nickname, they know, okay, it's that guy. A bit too fast. So I was publishing my first version, first big release. And as you can see, I was doing that an hour before Christmas dinner. I was in a rush. And I made a little doo-doo by removing some Git stuff. If you don't use a global Git setting on Mac, it will actually pick up your login name. And along with that, it will also pick up your computer name and your provider. So if you do want to be anonymous, keep this in mind and do set up stuff well. But if you want to, you can actually release fully, along with an anonymous email, fully release it to a repository. But that's just releasing. You also have to maintain stuff. What's interesting for me as well, I'm also acting as a developer advocate, you want people to use your code. And you could just say, here's the code, good luck with it, just look at the test, just look at the code, but that's not sufficient. You actually want people to read up, why did you make certain decisions? Why did you offer these internals and you didn't offer those internals, because those might not be useful for the people building apps on top of it. For myself, it was also nice to start writing a bit more Javadoc, because officially, if you publish your library, you're expected to also deliver Javadoc. I don't typically write a lot of Javadoc, just the thing that has impact, the most important stuff. So I also was covering like, maybe I should do a little bit more Javadoc as well. Some of the POJOs I actually documented Javadoc with ChatGPT, because I was a bit lazy, and I had too many fields. If you look at those items, those have like 50 fields, and yeah, this field returns this value. That's, You could copy paste, no one will read it, and with ChatGPT, it does sound like a lot better. The functions I built, those are documented extensively like I would document my normal complex code. I also decided to build some example projects, because if you have a library, you can just tell people, oh, go read the Javadoc. How many people are reading Javadoc nowadays? So having examples doing simple things, calling methods, and actually seeing what happens when you want to do a certain thing, example documentation or example code is quite useful, not just documentation. So you can run it locally and then extend it if you want to. I think many more projects should do this actually. Just give them, look for the most common use cases and build simple test cases for people. Just public static void main, this is what it's doing, this is what's coming out, and people can build upon that. One of the nice things I figured out while working on this is using Mother as a documenting system. Mark down any decision as a record. Typically it's called architectural decisions, but I think it's much broader than just any decision. So when you decide to do certain things, you can actually document them. I will try to switch to my main screen without messing it up, so I might have to, not that one. Like I mentioned, I have to switch my mirror. There you go. So this is an example of Mother. You try to document it as simple and concise as possible, any decision you take. And that can be an architectural decision, of course, but it can also be a decision like, oh, one of my colleagues has to check the logging in the morning. These will not just help you out within your team, because a year from now, you might not remember anymore, why did I make this decision, or why did we make this decision? But it also helps if you get a new colleague coming in, because they might not know why you took a decision half a year or a year ago. You might tell them, yeah, we took the decision, but typically you could ask them, why did we do that? What were the pros and cons? You can even change your view at a certain point and overrule them. So in this case, it's also minimized the service. You can see me also documenting, I didn't use Lombok. Originally I did, but then I started writing Javadoc, and I figured out that all those getters and setters, they don't work with Javadoc, with Lombok. And I had Java 21, so why not use records, along with a builder pattern? It was a bit more work, but for me that worked out quite well. I think this way of documenting things along with your code, because those are checked in with the same project, is a very nice way of, it's back, yes, very nice way to actually keep it where it belongs. The more in-depth architectural documentation you can keep separately in your architectural storage. You can write out large documents for people to read if they want to. You can refer to that. But those small decisions, those are perfectly covered within Mother. And as you can see here, it's a copy in case my browser didn't work. However, maintenance is more. It's also doing upgrades. And I will drop back again, because there's a wonderful plugin within Maven called Versions. And typically, I would tell people just use the display dependency updates. Because if you run the update fully, you will also get alpha, beta milestones. I did this talk at DevVox as well 2 weeks ago, and someone told me, like, hey, there's actually a filter you can use. And he was telling me to build up a lot of rules along this, but you don't just copy-paste those solutions. I started reading up, and I found that there's a simple one-line configuration that you can use that will also filter those out. So let me go to the screen again, and I guess we share it, yes. Sorry for the delays. There we go. So on the left, you can see the change I made, which is actually that the beta is missing at that point. I had to add beta because there's a new Maven 4.0.0 beta out. It was actually updated. But other than that, it will pick it up. So for me now, if I hope everything works properly, I can just run an update properties. And it will go to the internet, which is slow. Come on, this should be fast. There you go. What it does for me is not just suggest me which versions are available, leaving out the alphas, because if I do not add a filter, I will get an alpha version of sleft4j, I think, which I don't want. It's 10 months old. There's no new major version out. I only want major stable versions. I work at a bank, we want stuff to be stable. What this does for me is it updates not just, it lists which is available, but it also updates the file for me. So all I have to do now is just run a Maven verify. If it builds well, I can just build a new version and release it, and I'm done. If you do this every 1 or 2 weeks, your versions are much more updated, much more often updated, so you're much more up to date, and you don't have to look every couple of months like, oh, I went up like 10 versions, what broke in this part? And as you can see, everything builds fine. I could actually push a new version now and release it. I really love this way of making things easier with the annoying things we have to do as a developer. I could do a proof of concept with my own project at work, but having open source, you can actually tell people, it's here, you can look at it, and this is how it works. Maybe it also works for you. Also, outside your company and outside your bubble. But there's more than just updating versions, as you might know. I started out with Java 17, which is still great. But then Java 21 came along, so why not go for Java 21? Easy upgrades are done with open rewrites. That's also a tool I wanted to check out and actually use it and see how it provided me value, just without... You can go to a conference like this, look at stuff, and then, okay, this sounds nice. But I also like to see what happens when I use certain codes and certain solutions. So it updated Java 17 for me. It also corrected my package name, because I released with the GitHub repository, and I incorrectly named it com.github because it should be io.github, which is what you find out after you start releasing stuff. I will explain later why I had to do that. Once I decided which license I wanted to use, which is typically a couple of days before you start releasing it, or offering it actually in a repository, I had to update all my files with the correct license header. I just run a command, done in a couple of seconds, commit, done. I don't have to open files by myself, and oh, I forget one, and so this is perfect. Along with that, it can also help you update your code within a team. So if you have a certain coding standard, you can actually run some of the recipes, you can make those yourself as well, and update the code every time before you start to open a merge request towards your colleagues. If you prefer tabs over spaces, then it will correct those for you, for example. And please don't do that. What I also use it for is to migrate to assert.j, because you have normal code, you're used to building your tests in the way that you're typically building them. And I did want to check out assert.j as well. So that was another thing, like, yeah, I could just rewrite all my tests to assert.j and learn from it, or I could just see what open rewrite gives me and learn from the merge request that comes out, the difference between the files. After you've done all this, you're going to release code, but you also want people to use it. So what kind of a community are you looking for? And in this case, it's not a project that's going to be used by a lot of Java developers, but it's going to be used by people who actually want to print stuff on stream, on Twitch, on YouTube, or people who build tools on top of that to do something like that. I did want to offer the baseline and then have other people build up their own ideas and solutions on top, so they could maintain that part, and I would only focus on the library. So there's those that use it and those that build on top of it. I was expecting to get a lot more people to build on top of it, but it turned out it was mostly people using it. So for the developers, they just want good tooling, good documentation. You're all developers, you know how this works. But those streaming, they don't care about code. They just want to run stuff. It shouldn't take up a lot of CPU. It shouldn't take up a lot of memory. It should be easy to use, easy to configure. And they especially don't want it to look bad. Because if that's on screen, it looks horrible. How will you resolve that? So what I did in this point is actually make HTMLs available for all those users, and they could maintain them by themselves. I made quite basic HTML for them to edit, and I would find and replace values available to them and document those for developers to pick up. So the way that looks, this is one of the players, and you could see earlier there was a block behind me that was my own basic design, the default view. And this streamer said, yeah, I don't want text on my stream, so just make me play with emojis. And they came up with this. Then another streamer came up, and he did want text. But they had a discussion for over an hour, like, hey, how am I going to do the poison thing? Am I going to go to a mushroom or broccoli? And they started chatting with their viewers, which was quite interesting to watch, like, hey, are they discussing an hour about this? And they ended up with broccoli. So the flexibility in code is that you can actually just edit HTML any way you want and do with it what you want. It just gives you the application in the library. But you've built a library. So typically, how would you share it? Well, if you run stuff locally, the easy thing to do is to run Maven clean install. But you shouldn't, because then you're the only one who can use it. And typically, you should just use Maven verify. The easy way out would be, okay, I'm going to Maven Central. Makes sense to everyone. But I was exploring things, I wanted to learn things, so I started to talk to some students, like, when I was a student, I used Maven Central. What are you using nowadays? And they all came up with Jetpack, literally all of them. It's free for open source, that's pretty great. It's easy to upload. You don't even need an account. But I work for a bank. So you also have to add extra configuration. You have to do that on top, which might mean that if someone uploads, say, Spring.io component there, they could actually include some malware in your application because they added a repository on my request to use my library. I don't like that. They are very unclear on security and abuse. I can actually update a version up to 30 days after publishing it. So if I release a 1.0.0, 30 days long, I can make a new 1.0.0. It will see it, but I can break interfaces. It's great for proof of concepts, but not for a library you want people to use maybe a year, 5 years from now. So you look on, not just to Maven Central yet, but there's also GitHub packages nowadays, and they're also free for open source. Sounds great. I don't have to pay for it. They host for me. It is a great integration with the GitHub Actions. My code is hosted on GitHub. Sounds like a win. However, you also have to, again, add another repository. And not just add another repository, you also need a token because they do have some security. That token ends every 30 days. If this is the only reason why you used GitHub as a repository, then after 30 days, you have to get a new token. That's another obstacle. I want my code to be seamless and my library to be seamless and easy to use. So this is a bit of a letdown. Along with that, I've been giving this talk now for, I think, 6 months. I've been asking around since December, because that's when I published my first version. How is your security at GitHub? No one can tell me. I reached out to developer advocates at GitHub, like, hey, tell me, you have wonderful scanning on code, but you're suggesting code fixes. What if I upload a jar that has a vulnerability in it? Will you block me? Will you remove it? No one can answer me this so far, which is a bit disappointing. So again, I work for a bank, we want reliability. So yeah, let's look at Maven Central. And when you start talking about it, everyone is telling you, like, oh, you're crazy. There will be a lot of work. Don't do this. Apparently, it's quite difficult to set up. And I also saw this guy on the internet, maybe you've heard of him, complain about it. So I also told him, like, nowadays, it's a bit different. Because this is the old connection everyone knows. A year ago, things changed. Yep, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. Yes. The original, it was quite a challenge, and that has been around for more than 20 years. Last year they decided to update everything, make everything look better, and also not just give a new interface, but also make it easier to publish. And the reasons why they have all these checks and balances in place and why Maven Central is a lot more secure than, for example, NPM Central or JPEG, as mentioned earlier, is explained in this great talk. So if you do want to check out more, go look for this talk by Jamie Coleman. He was a former developer relations at their company. The old SSRH, bloody hell, has been decommissioned. It's still available if you had an account, but you can't make a new account anymore. So Josh was complaining about it. Yeah, you can build a new account like this, and you can't anymore. And if you do use this for your current open source project, migrate away from it. It's no longer maintained. It's available because people used it in the past, because you want to support open source, but there's a much better, easier portal available now. And I was lucky because I started releasing ML at the time that they started to do their public betas. So I could onboard, see how everything worked out. And as you can see in March, they stopped allowing access to the old portal. One of the issues I had, and that will be less over the coming months and years, is that I used a lot, you just look for information. So don't trust ChatGPT on this. It's much too old. But any information before March, typically try to look for newer information. That's also the reason why I published by accident using my own name, because I started cleaning up Git and, well, let's try this to see if this works. A lot of information is old and no longer works well, because things have become more secure and better, which is a good thing. But the new thing is Sonatype Central, which is still Maven Central, but well, the company is Sonatype and they wanted to make it look a bit different, so let's call it Sonatype Central now. It is typically the same. The interface looks better, but instead of having your own account, you can still use that one. You can now also use your Google account. And even more interesting, you can use a GitHub account. So if you have your code in GitHub, it sets up a lot of things for you. And with GitHub, you also get your IO GitHub domain. One of the security layers they have is having your own domain. So for example, the ING NL domain, we had to register that as ING. So it's also added security on top. If you have your own domain, you have to do the same thing. But if you're releasing with GitHub, you get it for free because GitHub has a connection to Sonatype Central, the new solution. So just log in with your account, and there's a lot of complexity and steps and delays taken away. That's also one of the things Josh was complaining about. The requirements are still the same because Maven Central should be secure. That's the reason we all use it. It's available, it's fast, and it's quite good in security. However, there are still a lot of requirements. You need to do a lot of things with the jar. This was quite a puzzle for me initially as well. Okay, how am I going to do this? The Java doc, I think you can get away with 1% coverage. You could, but well, please don't. Just do the important stuff if you don't want to write too much Java doc, or use ChatGPT for the POJOs like I did. But all the other things are also added, again, added security. And it's static. So once you publish a version, the jar is there, but the source is also belonging to the jar there, so you can build your own copy. You can't say, I have different sources. Those will be identical. And you get those locally as well if you check your local repository copy of Maven. Along with that, they include those checksums. And originally, when I was checking out Maven Central, my main challenge that I foresaw was also like, oh man, I have to sign all those things. How am I going to do that? If there's not a plugin available, I have to arrange my own certificates. And the new portal has quite a good documentation on how to do this. I think in 12 or 15 minutes, something along those lines, I set everything up and I was able to publish, following the documentation. They also have clear instructions if things don't work well, like, hey, I should look at this, and then take these actions to resolve the issue. So that main obstacle that I was foreseeing, it was gone. You have to supply license documentation as well, logically. So, but yeah, once you decided on it, so that's why you should decide on your license not too late in the process. And if you're uploading, you have to use a new layout. This is only important if you upload it before, because they will explain where to put files. They're now in the directory substructure, so if that's not there, it will be declined, etc. The reason why I know this I will show you later on. And like I mentioned, if it's published, it's there, it's solid. It's not like the zip pack that you can update it 30 days afterwards. 1.0.0 is there. And you're not going to be able to release a new version at that point. You really have to keep that in mind. If you want a new one, 1.0.1 at that point. So the process for me was just use a Maven plugin. That's easy. However, as you can see here, I had a 500 server error, and when I set up the debug logging, I got, that's a server error. Yes, wonderful. What should I do to fix it? Is it my fault? Is it your fault? I don't know. And I complained to them, and they fixed it in 0.50. They're currently at 0.60, so there's no 1.0 version either. They're really still building stuff up and improving upon it. So the web portal, that was my workaround. I already had a bundle to upload, so it's made by the plugin, but the upload itself failed. This is the new layout. You can see it's all modern. You publish it. Normally you would upload the zip. You get a version that takes about like 10 seconds. Then it validates, which takes about a minute. And then you publish it, which takes about another 2 minutes. You can grab a coffee. And then it's there. So from that moment on, once this states it's published, any computer worldwide can start using your library version. Nowadays, it's fixed. So all I have to do is Maven prepare the release and then publish it. I can grab a coffee, and when I'm back, it says it's done. Because you can tell it to wait until it's actually published, those 2 minutes. And then once the terminal returns for you, it's like, okay, it's available now. I can actually now use it. Because you don't want to use this locally completely. Something I do want to play around with, and which we'll probably do in the coming months, is play with JRelease, which does take a lot of these frustrations and issues away. So if you do want to publish now, this is also something you should look at. It is, however, a bit overkill for me. I have maybe like 10 active developer users. They know me, I can reach out to them. If you have a project that has like over 100 users, you don't know them, then this allows you also to publish to Twitter, Blue Sky, etc. Make release notes. So if you have a multi-user project, it's a lot more interesting at that point. Takeaways for me, it's not really as hard as it was supposed to be, so that's a good sign, including to Josh, like just move to the new portal, which I just heard he did 2 weeks ago, so that part's getting a lot better. And there's a lot more challenging than just publishing. You have a lot more things to think about, to worry about. Like I mentioned, document decisions, document the interfaces, and expecting who your users are. Because originally I thought my users would be developers and a couple of people using it for streams. It turned out most of my users at the moment are those streaming, and only a handful of developers actually building on top of it. You can ignore all the other older articles. Just anything before March, forget it. Just look for modern stuff. Don't use ChatGPT yet for this kind of stuff. Maybe next year, maybe not. Just if you want to be clean and release and just use the proper documentation, just read. And some elements are still complex, but well documented. So not a big issue there either. I was expecting a challenge there, and it wasn't. So it worked out quite well. And as mentioned, the tooling needs to mature. There's no 1.0 version yet. 0.6 is production ready. You can actually use it. But they still need to add some stuff of the old portable footer. Finally, I think we'll remove every part of it. But we'll see over time. So there's support and community. I wasn't expecting a lot of users. But yeah, for me, it's fine, the amount. But over time, I hope to see more next year. Maybe some people building some more products on top of it. See what happens there. So I will have the questions up, but for people who also are looking for URLs, I would like some feedback. So if you want to give feedback, scan the code. If you want to check out the URLs, it's also available. But if there's any questions, feel free to ask them now. I think we have a couple minutes left.